Montana Territory, 1883. The wind was high and dry when she fell. Luke Grantham had been fixing the squealing gear on his windmill when he saw her, a woman stumbling from the east, barely upright, dress torn at the hem, dust clinging to her like a second skin. She made it just past the fence line, eyes glassy, before her knees gave out and she collapsed into the brittle grass. Hey, hey! Luke dropped his wrench and vaulted over the fence, boots pounding the earth. He crouched beside her, heart hammering. Ma'am? Can you hear me? She was breathing, but only just. Skin pale, lips cracked. He lifted her carefully, arms steady even as his gut twisted. She weighed near nothing. Luke carried her to the cabin, the windmill creaking behind him like an old warning. Inside, he laid her down on the cot near the hearth and lit a fire. She didn't wake, not when he dabbed water on her lips, not when he cleaned the blood from a shallow cut along her temple. Her hands were scraped raw, and her ankle swollen. Her dress was torn like she'd run through thorns. He sat by her side, waiting. By sundown, she stirred. Her eyes fluttered open, confused, panicked. Where am I? Safe, Luke said quietly. You collapsed near my windmill. I brought you inside. She tried to sit up and winced. My ankle. Twisted, maybe worse, he said. You need rest. She looked around the room, wide-eyed but alert now. Her voice was soft. I did not mean to intrude. You did not, Luke said, firm but kind. You needed help. Silence settled between them, warm from the fire but heavy with something unspoken. Finally she nodded, eyes falling to her hands. My name's Luke Grantham, he offered. You got a name? She hesitated. Josephine Langley. Luke smiled just enough to ease the air. Well, Josephine Langley. You are safe here. She looked up at that, really looked at him. Something changed in her face, relief, maybe. Or the first crack in whatever kept her running. That night, she slept through, and he sat nearby, watching the fire and wondering who she was, what she had fled from, and why her face felt like something he had been waiting to see without knowing it. By the second day, she could sit up. She let him wrap her ankle in a clean cloth, though she flinched at his touch. You got family nearby? Luke asked as he handed her a tin of broth. No. Her answer came too quickly. They are gone. Luke nodded once. He would not press. Her voice had a break in it that told him she had run from more than just bad luck. He looked toward the windmill, turning slow in the breeze. You came a long way on foot, he said. I had no choice, she whispered. Later, while she rested, he stepped outside and stared down the long stretch of prairie. The land was wide and quiet, but danger always found its way through silence. He had seen it too often to pretend otherwise. On the third day, she told him pieces. I was married. Once, she said, eyes on the fire. He died 2 winters ago. Then, things went wrong. Men came. Took what they wanted. I ran. Luke listened, jaw tight. He did not ask for names. He did not need them. You saved me, she said finally, looking over at him. Luke cleared his throat. You would have done the same. She smiled, faint but real. Not everyone would have stopped. I would have, he said. Every time. Her eyes lingered on him longer than before. By the 5th day, she used a cane he carved from a mesquite branch. She hobbled to the porch, and he helped her sit in the rocker. I have not known kindness in a long time, she said. Luke looked out over the land, sun dipping low. It should not be such a rare thing. She turned toward him. Why are you out here alone? He hesitated, then shrugged. I was a cattleman. Lost my herd to rustlers last year. Could not stomach rebuilding. So I came here. Quiet suits me. You have no one? Not yet. Josephine looked at him, her expression softening. I think you were meant to find me. Luke's chest tightened. I think maybe I was, he said quietly. On the 7th night, rain came hard. Thunder rolled across the plains. Josephine startled at the sound, breathing fast. Luke came to her side. It's just thunder. I know. I hate storms. He crouched beside her, taking her hand gently. You are safe here. She turned to him, eyes shining. I believe you. He brushed a damp strand of hair from her cheek. You do not have to run anymore. Josephine leaned into his touch, and his hand stayed there, steady. By the 10th day, she moved without the cane. Her ankles still ached, but her steps were firm. That evening, she helped him stack firewood. Their hands brushed, and she looked up at him. I never thought I would feel safe again, she said. You are, Luke said, voice low. I thought love was something I was never meant to have twice. Luke paused, eyes never leaving hers. Maybe it was not twice. Maybe it was just waiting. She took a breath. Then she stepped closer. He cupped her face, gentle. You do not have to be afraid. I am not, she whispered. Not with you. He kissed her then, slow and sure. The kind of kiss that meant something had changed forever. The windmill creaked behind them as the sky turned gold. And they held each other long after the sun went down. The frost came early that year. By mid-September, the mornings bit sharp, and the ground held the cold long after the sun reached it. Luke had taken to rising before light, checking the trap lines and hauling water before the well iced over. Josephine, wrapped in one of his old flannel shirts, had begun baking cornbread in the cast iron pan without needing instruction. She used molasses from the jar he'd forgotten he had, and the cabin smelled like something sweeter than he'd thought possible. One morning, as he returned with a bucket of water, he found her kneeling by the hearth, rolling a scrap of cloth between her fingers. I'd like to sew something, she said, not looking up. My hands need work. Luke set the bucket down and leaned his weight on the table's edge. There's a cedar chest under the bed. My ma kept needles and thread in there. Been years, but it's yours if you want it. She rose carefully, favoring the healing ankle, and opened the chest. Inside were remnants of someone else's life, lace edging yellowed with time, a child's bonnet, quilt squares half-pieced. Josephine ran her hand over the fabric as though touching something sacred. Did she live here? She asked. Luke shook his head. Just visited. My folks were in Nebraska. She came out once when I bought the land. Didn't like the wind. Josephine smiled faintly. I don't mind it. He watched her for a moment, then turned to stoke the fire. The silence between them had changed and no longer held unease, but a kind of quiet understanding. Not everything needed words. That afternoon, she sat on the porch steps hemming a shirt sleeve while Luke repaired the fence rail that had been split by a wandering mule deer. He could hear her humming low, tuneless, but steady. You ever sew for a living? He asked without looking up. I used to mend uniforms, she said. During the war. My father was a surgeon for the Union. I followed him to field camps after my mother passed. Luke straightened, wiping his hands on his trousers. You saw the camps? I was 13, she said. He taught me to tie off wounds and boil water before I knew how to write a letter. He leaned one arm on the top rail, watching her now. That explains your backbone. Josephine glanced up. It explains the weight I've carried. That night, she sat at the table, carefully trimming the frayed collar of the shirt he wore most. Luke watched her hands move with practiced grace. You never speak about what you want, she said finally. He set down the can he'd been mending. Want? For yourself? For after this? Luke considered that. The fire crackled behind him, throwing long shadows across the floor. I reckon I want a life that doesn't start with loss, he said. And maybe someone to sit across from me when the world gets quiet. She folded the shirt and set it aside. That someone might already be here. His breath caught at the certainty in her voice. She didn't look away. He crossed the room and pulled out the chair beside her. You sure? I've lived enough years to know when something's real. Luke reached for her hand, rough palm to delicate fingers. Then let's make it something that lasts. She nodded, and the look she gave him was steady as morning light. They lay beside each other that night, not touching, but close enough to breathe the same air. The window was cracked open, and the windmill creaked as it turned slow in the dark. Josephine's breathing had changed deeper, steadier, and Luke kept his eyes on the ceiling, his thoughts quieter than they'd ever been. Not empty, but full of a new kind of weight. The kind that came with choosing to stay. In the days that followed, Josephine began planting bulbs along the south side of the cabin, tulips and daffodils she found wrapped in burlap at the bottom of the chest. Luke built her a low bench from leftover lumber, and she sat there in the afternoons, warming her face in the sun. One evening, as the last light turned the prairie gold, Josephine stood at the fence line, watching the horizon. Luke came up behind her, resting his hand lightly on her back. "I want to build a room," he said. "Off the kitchen. For you." She turned toward him, eyes soft. "You already gave me the whole house." He gave a slow nod. "Still, I want it to be ours." Josephine stepped in close, resting her forehead against his chest. "Then let it be a room with windows. I want to see the sunrise." He wrapped his arms around her, anchoring her to the ground. "Then windows it'll have." The prairie wind moved through the grass like breath, and the world felt quiet again. But it was a different quiet now, not empty or alone. Just still. Like the moment before something begins. The first hard frost came in the night. Luke stepped outside at dawn, boots crunching over the thin crust of ice that had crept across the grass. The sky was clear and brittle, pale as bleached bone. Inside the cabin, Josephine was still asleep, her breath rising slow and even beneath the quilt. He didn't wake her. Instead, he walked the perimeter of the land, checking the hen house and the barn, the fence line where a post had begun to lean. By the time he returned, she was sitting at the table, hair braided down her back, her palms cupped around a tin mug. "You were gone a while," she said, not accusing, just noticing. "Fence needs another post," he replied, taking the seat across from her. "I can cut one from the western cedar before midday." She nodded, then looked at her hands. "I had a dream about my father. He was asking me what I planned to do. I didn't have an answer." Luke waited. She didn't often bring up the past on her own. "I think I stopped making plans when the war ended," she said. "It felt like the world had changed its shape. I didn't know where to fit anymore." He reached for the mug she'd left on the stove and poured himself what was left. "Seems to me you fit here." Josephine looked up. Her eyes didn't carry the same weight they once had. "I'm starting to believe that." Later that day, while Luke hauled the cedar trunk from the base of the ridge, Josephine knelt at the edge of the cabin's north wall, pressing her fingers into the cold soil. She'd found a patch of wild onion growing there and was working to clear it without damaging the roots. When Luke returned with the post balanced across his shoulders, he paused at the sight of her crouched in the dirt, face lit with the quiet satisfaction of doing something that mattered. "You planning on feeding us with that?" he asked, setting the post down with a thud. Josephine sat back on her heels. "Not yet. But it's something that grows without asking. I admire that." "Never thought I'd see you with dirt under your nails," he said, wiping his brow. "You've only known me in the after," she said. "Before, I kept a garden every spring. Even in Virginia clay." Luke crouched beside her, resting his forearms on his knees. "What else did you do? Before?" She tilted her head, thinking. "I played the pianoforte. Badly. I read poetry I didn't understand. I wore gloves even in summer." A pause. "But I never felt solid. I do now." That evening, she found an old oil lamp in the barn's loft, the glass chimney intact beneath a layer of dust. She cleaned it with vinegar and hung it near the window above the table. When Luke came in from splitting firewood, he saw the soft glow and paused in the doorway. Josephine didn't turn. I thought we might need a little light that isn't from the fire. He stepped inside, setting his gloves on the shelf. That lamp belonged to the man who sold me the land. Said his wife used it to read scripture by. Then it's seen love, she said. Luke crossed the room and stood behind her. It still does. She turned to face him, her hand brushing his chest, tentative, then certain. I want to stay. He nodded, resting his palm against hers. Then you will. Before bed, they sat on the floor beside the hearth, Josephine darning a tear in the elbow of one of his work shirts, Luke whittling a spoon from a scrap of pine. Outside, the wind had settled to a whisper. Inside, the quiet was thick with something solid and unspoken. She laid the shirt aside and looked at him. I want to build a life from scratch. No echoes. Just what we choose. Luke set the spoon down and turned to her fully. Then we'll do just that. No ghosts. Just us. Josephine leaned forward, her forehead resting against his. It's the first time I believed in something I couldn't see. He closed his eyes, breathing her in. You don't have to see it, he said. You're living it. They sat like that a long time, the fire low, the night full around them, not empty, not waiting, but already begun. By the end of September, the days held a sharper hush. The kind of quiet that settled not just in the land, but in the bones. Luke stood at the edge of the barn roof, hammering the shingles back into place one by one, the pitch of the wind tugging at his collar. Below, Josephine was hanging the last of the linens across the fence, her hands red from the cold, her braid pinned tighter than usual. She glanced up when he climbed down, brushing sawdust from his sleeves. There's a wagon coming from the east, she said, nodding past the clothesline. Luke turned. A narrow frame, pale canvas top, drawn by a single roan gelding. The wheels moved slow, skimming the ruts like the driver wasn't in much hurry. He narrowed his eyes. You expecting anyone? No, she answered, voice steady. You? Not unless the postmaster decided to bring my nails by hand. As the wagon neared, Luke stepped forward, hand resting near the side of his belt. Not reaching, just ready. The driver pulled the horse to a stop a few feet from the gate. He was thin, perhaps in his 40s, with a face drawn long by sun and worry. Afternoon, the man said, tipping his hat. Name's Ray Harlan. I came from Miles City. Looking for shelter. My wife passed last winter, and I've got a 6-year-old boy asleep under that tarp. We've been sleeping rough since August. Luke glanced at Josephine, who was already moving toward the wagon. She peeled back the canvas gently, revealing a small shape curled beneath a quilt. The boy stirred but didn't wake. He's burning up, she said, voice low. Ray looked down, jaw clenched. Fever came sudden 2 days back. I've been trying to reach Helena, but we ran short on oats. I seen your windmill from the ridge. Luke exhaled through his nose. We've got a cot. Come inside. Ray hesitated. I don't want to bring trouble. You didn't, Luke said. But that boy needs warmth. They brought the child inside. Josephine wet a cloth and pressed it to his forehead, her touch practiced but gentle. Luke poured a small measure of cornmeal into the pot and stirred slowly, watching her from across the room. Later, when the boy slept easier and Ray sat at the table with a cup of water he hadn't asked for, Josephine stepped outside. Luke followed. They stood on the porch, boots side by side. She rubbed her arms against the chill. He's not dangerous, she said. I know. He's not like the men that came after me. I know that too. She turned to face him, brows drawn. I just needed you to be sure. Luke nodded once. You trust your judgment. So do I. They stood in silence as the wind dragged low across the field. Inside, Ray's voice broke through the stillness. He said your name's Luke Grantham. Luke stepped back into the doorway. That's right. I knew a man by that name. Served with my brother down near Dodge. You any kin to Henry Grantham? Luke's jaw shifted. He was my uncle. Well then. Henry saved my brother's life at Medicine Lodge Creek. Got him out when the fire started. That name Grantham. It always meant something where I'm from. Luke nodded, his voice even. He died in Kansas. Buried near the river bend. I'm sorry to hear that. Josephine returned to the doorway, her eyes searching Luke's face. You never spoke of him. I don't speak of most things, he said. Doesn't mean I forget. The next morning, Ray hitched the roan to the fence and scrubbed pots with melted snow, while Josephine fed his boy broth in small spoonfuls. Luke finished driving the last cedar post into the fence line and returned with a strip of hide he'd carved into a sling for the child's arm, which had begun to ache from coughing. When Ray came into the cabin again, he looked from Josephine to Luke. I can't pay you. You're not meant to, Josephine said. Ray's voice cracked a little. This land's different. You feel it. Luke set the sling on the table. It's not the land. It's what we're making of it. That night, after Ray and the boys slept in the barn under blankets Josephine had aired and folded, Luke sat on the porch step, oil lamp flickering at his side. Josephine joined him, her hands wrapped around a mug of boiled chicory. You've changed since that first morning, she said. More than once. So have you. She didn't speak for a while. Then, softly, I don't have fear in me the way I did. Luke turned to her. You don't need it anymore. She rested her head against his shoulder, and he leaned into her without hesitation. I want to plant rye in the spring, she said. Not for profit. Just to see it grow. Luke tipped his head toward hers. Then we'll build a box for the seed. Keep it dry through winter. Josephine tilted her face toward his, her breath warm in the cold air. You said once you didn't have anyone. I was wrong, he said. She kissed him there, slow and certain, the way someone touches ground after a long journey. The wind shifted, wrapping around them like a shawl. And for the first time, the land didn't feel like something to endure. It felt like something they'd earned. The first snow came in the middle of the night, quiet as breath. When Josephine opened the door in the morning, the world lay covered in a thin white hush, the drifts soft and low against the porch steps. Luke stood near the barn, brushing snow from the gelding's bridle with his bare hands, steam rising from the animal's nostrils in slow plumes. Josephine stepped into her boots and crossed to him, her coat still unbuttoned. Ray left before sunrise, she said. He left a note folded near the hearth. Luke nodded once. The boy's fever broke yesterday. He'll make it west. Josephine reached out, brushing a clump of snow from Luke's shoulder. We gave them what we could. We did. She looked out past the fence line. I've been thinking about the room you mentioned. Luke adjusted the gelding's reins. Something wrong with it? No. I want to build it as a sewing room. With a small shelf for my books. And I'd like to paint the walls pale green. She turned to him. If that's all right. I'll plane the lumber this week, he said. We'll need to ride to the mill for more nails. There's enough paint left in the shed for what you want. She smiled, and it held. I've never made a room for myself before. Luke reached for her hand, not minding the cold. You're not making it alone. The storm held off for 2 more days. In that time, they cleared the south side of the cabin, laying chalk lines in the dirt to measure the new foundation. Josephine marked each corner with a stone, her fingers red and stiff from the air. Luke cut the joists to length, the rhythm of his saw steady and sure. They worked wordlessly most of the time, but when he handed her the hammer with the worn hickory handle, he said, That was my father's. She traced her thumb over the grip. I'll take care with it. You already do. That night, as the wind picked up, Luke brought in the last of the firewood and bolted the door. Josephine knelt near the hearth, unfolding a length of muslin she'd found tucked behind the cedar chest. She held it up, studying the weave. I could make curtains for the new windows, she said. Something light, so the sun still gets through. Luke pulled off his boots and sat beside her. What else do you want for the room? Josephine folded the muslin slowly. A place to keep the letters I haven't written yet. Maybe a rug? Nothing fancy. He rested his hand over hers. We'll find one come spring. Trade feed for it, if we have to. She leaned into him, her cheek against his shoulder. Do you ever wonder what your uncle would have thought of this place? Luke stared into the fire. He'd have liked the quiet. Said once that peace wasn't something you found, it was something you built. Josephine nodded against him. Then he'd be proud of you. They stayed near the fire until the wood burned low and the snow began to fall thick against the windows. Josephine rose, pulling the quilt from the cot and draping it over both their shoulders before settling beside him again. I've been thinking, she said, voice soft. If we're going to build a life here, we should marry. Luke turned to her, eyes steady. You sure? I am, she said. Not because I feel I have to. Because I want to. He didn't rush to answer. Instead, he reached into the pocket of his shirt and pulled out a plain silver ring worn smooth, no stone. My mother wore this till her hands swelled from the cold, he said. She gave it to me before I left Nebraska. Josephine took it, holding it between her fingers like something fragile. I don't need anything fancy. You'll never want for anything, he said. Not while I've got breath in me. She slid the ring onto her own finger, then took his hand in both of hers. Let's say our vows here. Just us. Luke nodded, and they stood, facing each other in the firelight. I take you, Josephine Langley, he said slowly, to walk beside me through drought and snow, through quiet and storm. I will keep you safe, and I will never turn away. She met his gaze. I take you, Luke Grantham, to stand with me, not behind, not ahead, but beside. I will share what I have, and I will never let the dark take you. He kissed her then, with the full weight of everything they had endured and everything they would build. It wasn't a beginning, not exactly. More a folding together of two lives already underway. By early March, the ground thawed enough to dig post holes again. The sewing room stood with its green walls and sunlight slanting through muslin curtains, just as she'd wanted. Luke had carved her a low bench from pine, and she placed it beneath the window, where she sat in the afternoons stitching through the quiet. The books he'd traded for in town lined the shelf he built with his father's hammer. They planted rye that spring. Not for profit, but to watch it rise. They built a life from scratch, no echoes, no ghosts. Just what they chose. And when the wind shifted, it no longer felt like something to brace against. It felt like home.